In our time, it was very sexual, always, no matter what.
Yeah.
If the girls were outside because it was hot, then they would pose a certain way so that we would look at them, and we would sit there looking at them, it would be like they're checking them out,
Speaking from a woman's perspective, if you see a guy and he has no friends that are women, it's a bit of a,
weird.
Like they could say now, a bit of a red flag.
In my case, every time I happened to have a closeness with a girl that I found attractive, I would always end up wanting to sleep with her.
When you're best friends with a woman, I found the closeness that you have can often resemble a relationship, and that can generally lead to, just the two worlds colliding. Blurred lines, exactly. Right. The only time that I do think problems can arise and feelings get mixed around is when men and women are... One question has ruined friendships, ruined relationships, caused division, and that is, can men and women be friends? Welcome to another episode of the Son of a Podcast. And as you can see, I am back in Spain. I am on my summer holidays, finally. So the podcasts are going to be in person. And as you can probably tell by my introduction, today's episode is about men and women being friends.
Yes.
If they can, if they can't, the complications around them. So let's get right onto it. Do you want to say anything before
Yes,
we start?
I do.
Say,
I am your father.
There we go. See, I missed that. I've missed that.
So have I, man. So have I. It's been a few weeks.
It has. But we're back.
We can actually consider this season 2, maybe.
Yes, we can actually.
Instead of episode 37, it could be episode 1 of season 2. Whatever.
Yeah, we can see. That's actually a good idea. But
all right, get to it.
So I kind of guess the first question that I have for you is, did you or do you have female friends?
Right now, I think I do, yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Right now, at my age, there's absolutely no problem with men and women being friends, I don't think.
Okay, perfect. Now, you just said at my age. Could you expand on that a bit? What do you mean by at my age?
Well, at your age, it was a little harder.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think... let me preamble everything by saying that it's quite an interesting subject. It's much deeper than I thought it was, because when you put it forward and you suggested it, I thought, I've been thinking about that all my life, and I grew up thinking about this. But these days, it's much more complex than it was at my time, because these days it's not just men and women, is it?
No. What do you mean by that?
Well, these days, at my time, it was just as simple as you're a guy, you like a woman, you're a woman, you like a guy, or, if you have relationships with men and women. And that was pretty much it. Things like being gay, homosexuality, pansexuality, all that wasn't even a thing, right? Back when I was your age, it was considered taboo, all that, right? So I do have friends that are gay, but at that time they weren't gay, right? They only came out afterwards. So it was really simple. It was, I'm a guy, you're a girl, we're friends, and do I like you as a friend, or do I like you as something more than a friend? So I was quite excited when you mentioned the subject, because I hadn't actually thought about any of what you guys might be living through. So I'm curious about that. Anyway, to answer your question.
Yes.
What was your question?
Well, I kind of guess, do you have female friends?
Female friends, yes. As you say, at this stage, no problem. At this age, when I'm, in your mid-50s, your priorities have totally changed to what they were back in your 20s. And I have no problem. Friends are being acquaintances. So there's people I work with that are female. There's there's Jess, there's Fred's wife, Terete, I consider them friends, no more than that, and it's absolutely no problem. I think we also have to make sure that everybody knows what we mean by can men and women be friends.
Yeah. In
my case, what I mean is that whether sexuality gets in the way of that friendship, right? I don't know if that's what you mean when men and women can be friends.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, we have to clarify that as well, because otherwise we're like, what? It's a bit of a weird argument. I think at your age it's a little harder. or at least when I was your age, it was a little harder to be friends with a woman that either you found attractive or was that empirically, globally considered attractive. Because I'm not really sure if it's hormones or if it's just the natural way society was at that time. You pretty much wanted to have something with them. And the friendship helped that out, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's my point of view on that. And it was always quite hard. In fact, I happened to always end up falling in love with the girls that I considered friends. Because they also happened to be pretty attractive. And I ended up falling in love with them. And, Alfredo and Chinda always made fun of me because of that.
Yeah.
However, they seemingly didn't have that problem.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. It'd be nice if one of them was around.
Yeah, probably. I feel like now it's easier for me, but especially when you're growing up and during I forgot puberty. There we go. I feel like especially then, it's very, I guess, strange in a way. But I do have one thing to clarify, and for me, I find it's very, I don't want to say easy because obviously it's not easy, but there's no problem with males and females being friends or men and women being friends. I think that most of the time there won't cause any problems. The only time that I do think problems can arise and feelings get mixed around for one or the other or for both is when men and women are best friends. I feel like when they become best friends, I feel like that's when things can take a turn or become confusing and people's feelings can get mixed,
Right. So is that okay? So yeah, I hadn't thought. For me, it was just like general friendships. So you're talking about a level of closeness and intimacy that's beyond just the acquaintance, right? So you're really good friends.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. However, isn't that so? What you're really saying is that in your case, that friendship becomes so close because of the attraction? Is that why it becomes dangerous? Has it happened to you before?
I feel like it has,
Right.
but at the same time, well, actually, no, it hasn't really. Because I mean, I want to say it has, but we were dating at the time, so it has.
So well, that answers the question. Then you couldn't be friends. Sex gets in the way.
But we were.
Right. When I mean sex, I don't really mean sex in the physical sense of the world. I mean in the word in the physical sense of the word. I mean it in the romantic sense, in the relationship.
Well, because let me say, I do have a lot of female friends and friends that are women. I can list many, and I feel like for all of them, apart from obviously my ex, nothing has ever happened or gotten in the way, but that's because they're not my best friends. I feel like you said, when you're best friends with a woman, I found it, or from what I've also seen it, the closeness that you have can often resemble a relationship,
right?
And that can generally lead to either just the two worlds colliding. Blurred lines, exactly.
Right, and is that related to physical attraction or not?
Probably. I'd say, physical and also emotional attraction.
Well, right. So what my question is, so if you have a best friend that's a female, and you don't find her physically attractive at all, would you have an issue just being best friends with her, or would that those blurred lines eventually come?
If I didn't find her physically attractive, I don't know.
Because I've
never been in that situation.
All right.
But I presume after I'd say so, to be honest. I mean,
you think? I've been in that situation.
It's going to sound bad, but I want to ask how physically unattractive do I find her?
Well, I mean, you have your taste. I mean, I can't really tell you, but you have your taste. Everybody has their taste, right?
Yeah.
You might like blondes and blue-eyed girls and tall girls or whatever.
Yeah.
And you might like them thin or not thin, whatever.
Yeah.
If they don't match that criteria, then it's probably easier to just get along with them as friends and treat them as if they were just a buddy, right? At least my experience is that it's easier to find somebody a girl that you don't find attractive, physically attractive, and that's therefore is not going to trigger your hormones or your pheromones or whatever. It's much easier to get along with them as a buddy and as a dude, than if they weren't. If they weren't, in my case, every time I happened to have a closeness with a girl that I found attractive, I would always end up wanting to sleep with her. Basically, that's the thing, or because we got along so well, having a relationship and physical relationship with him, right? There was those blurred lines were right there, and really, ultimately, the reason why I became friends with her in the first place was because I found them attractive. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I have had girlfriends, or rather, female friends, that I got along with very well, that I didn't find physically attractive at all, and they were just really cool people that I got along with. But because I didn't find them physically attractive, I didn't think any further than that.
Right.
So
Yeah. Like I said, I haven't experienced it, but yeah, thinking about it, then you're probably right. If I don't find them physically attractive, then it's significantly easier to to keep the lines solid, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Not blur the lines.
Exactly. And I found that they might fill a void in my life that maybe a guy friend can't fill in some sort of way.
That's also another thing, is I feel like the friendship between a guy and a guy and a guy and a girl are two very different friendships. Obviously, it depends on
of course
on
the person,
the personality. But I'm generalizing right now. So normally, from what I've found, the conversations between a guy and a girl end up being a lot more emotional and a lot more. Maybe not in your case with Fred and Nick, because you guys always went super deep with the conversations, but with what I found, you talk about your emotions a lot more and what's happening and how you're feeling
than with your guy friends.
With my guy friends.
So why do you think that is?
Why do you think that is?
Because that happens to you, right? And that used to happen to us in our time.
Yeah, definitely.
And what do you think that is? What is it in your relationship with your dude friends that makes you not want to talk about your?
Well, it's not that we don't, and it's not that we want to. I think it is. I think that's I don't want to say the only, but the main thing in common that we have, right, is we all have emotions.
Yeah.
So if I start talking to, I don't know, let's say Violet about Valorant, she's gonna be like, dude, respectfully, shut the fuck up, because I don't first of all, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm not interested. You know. Whereas if I talk to Raul or Krish about Valorant, then they know what's happening and they'll continue the conversation, right? Or football or basketball or whatever. So I feel like that's a main.
So, but you're flipping it around. So what would you talk to somebody like Violet about then? Violet, by the way, is one of his best friends, right? Went to school with you, or a good friend? Or,
a good friend.
I wouldn't a good friend, not best friend.
No offense, Violet, if you're watching, but
are you physically attracted to her?
No.
Just putting it out there.
Yeah. I mean, if it was a yes, it would be kind of awkward, but no, I don't.
No. I mean, it's because you're talking about her specifically. I mean, if you hadn't mentioned names, but seeing as you have, right? So anyway, back to the subject.
Yeah.
So when you talk to Violet, it's not about Valorant or football, or do you talk to her about other girls and say, Violet, man, I saw this girl, she was so hot, or whatever?
Yeah, I suppose if the occasion is there. I mean, we talk about a lot of different things, Also, lately, it's kind of every time we see each other, it's been months because we are in university now. So most of the time, it's talking about giving life updates, But yeah, back in the days, it was kind of.
You'd be talking more about your feelings about everything, or.
Yeah, I'd want to say so.
Okay.
Maybe she disagrees, and maybe my memory is not right.
Well, Violet, I feel like if you're listening to this, you know what to do.
Yeah.
Write a little comment and let us know.
But yeah, I feel like generally that's what happens, and ultimately, when you talk about your feelings and your emotions a lot with someone, you generally create a much tighter bond with someone, right?
True.
So, like I said,
right. So then, but that's a little bit of a contradiction, right? Because
Why?
if you're telling me that's what happens if you talk about your feelings with somebody, that creates a closer bond, a more tighter bond. If you don't talk about that kind of things with your guy friends and with your best friends,
that's what I'm saying. It's not that we don't, right?
You just talk about it differently.
No, we just talk about it less because we have other things in common and other things that we like to talk about, right?
I don't know.
Because ultimately, if you're friends with someone, right, and that person likes guitars, likes basketball, likes marketing, likes leadership, a lot of the times
I'm there.
Exactly, you're gonna be talking about guitars, leadership, marketing.
Yeah.
You're gonna be talking about basketball, right? More often than your feelings and your emotions.
I guess you're right.
Right?
Yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, so let me ask you this: something that I've found that is hugely different between my generation and yours.
Yeah.
Is that aspect of sexuality, right? In my time, it was constant. It was, at least in my society anyway. I don't know if it was a worldwide thing or just a thing here on the coast or whatever, but it was always present. Sexuality was always present. It was, if you went out with a girl, or if you went out clubbing or drinking or whatever, it was always like, will I find a girl, and when you had conversations with a girl, when you had a relationship with a girl, sex and intimate relationships were always right there at the forefront. I'm assuming it's because.
And what do you mean?
Well, you always had to have sex with a girl. It was always, when you went out with a girl, the next day your friends would always, the first thing they would ask you is like, did anything happen? Did you, did you get the typical, you get to first base, second base, third base? You heard that word before, right?
Yeah.
Well, that was always the case. And it was always sort of bantery type thing, right? And the girls had exactly the same thing in a different way. From seeing you guys now, I figured that was mostly a societal thing. It wasn't just hormones that were playing up. Everybody has hormones. But I think society exacerbated that and exaggerated it. And that's something that I don't really see that much with you guys. Or is it, and I'm just too old?
What? I was talking about girls and stuff.
Yeah, the sexuality thing. I think you guys have it easier to just hang out as a group of friends generally and not have that sexual element permeate the whole atmosphere.
I think I completely disagree. I think that still does happen nowadays, but I feel like it's very the line is clearly defined of if it's gonna happen or not beforehand, if you know what I mean.
No, yeah, I totally get it, because we live in very different times. At that time, you have to be really, really careful of harassment. You have to be careful with what might happen. At our age, you had to be careful, but not even half as much. At that time, our biggest concern was AIDS, which was a huge thing. But consent or not consent wasn't really as defined as it is now.
Right.
At least in my little world, which was very, very small, granted, and respect was always there, right? So we didn't really have to worry about anything to do with, if a girl said no, it was no, right?
Yeah. Well, obviously,
but it wasn't so. They normally never said no. They just like pushed you away, and you tried. Not like now. Right now, they push you away, and you're like, oh man, I'm out of here.
No, but I'm not necessarily talking about that. I'm talking about, because I feel like that's kind of just. Yeah, kind of a different conversation, but I'm talking more of, obviously it depends on the context. If you're in the club and you're talking to a girl, then we know that the context is that you're gonna try to hook up with her or make out with her or whatever. But if we're somewhere normal with a group of friends, we're not gonna ask you. So were you trying to?
Well, but you see, that's what I mean. It wasn't like that in our time. In our time, we always had, same as you guys. Of course, I work in the school, so I see the sixth formers hanging out together, and I see I'm gonna call it healthier. But I'm not really sure that's the right word. But it's more of a natural symbiosis that the girls and the boys have. In our time, it was very sexual, always, no matter what.
Yeah.
Always very sexual, So if the girls were outside because it was hot, then they would pose a certain way so that we would look at them. You know, we would sit there looking at them. You know, it would be like they're check them out. You know, you guys don't do that anymore, right? So that kind of thing, and it was pretty obvious by your standards now. You'd be scandalized at the way they posed and the way we looked at them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen anymore. So I'm just wondering whether it was it was just hormones have changed or that society has changed.
Well, I don't think biology has changed. I think it's society.
That's right. My guess it's society. But it's funny how you can control things without even thinking about them. Because at that time we couldn't control it, man.
Yes, but I mean, I feel like it's just the mentality of things, you know. I feel like for you guys, just being friends wasn't really an option. I don't know if that's true or not, but from what you're saying, I feel like the just being friends wasn't like, it's like, dude, what? You know?
That's true.
Whereas nowadays, for us, the fact that, you know, you're friends with a woman is, you know, completely normal. And I feel like even now, if you don't have any women friends, so speaking from a woman's perspective, if you see a guy and he has no friends that are women, it's a bit of a, you know, like they say now, a bit of a red flag. Right. You know, it's a bit of a, oof, I wonder why that is, you know?
Yeah.
What is he around? How is he like around women for him not to have any friends that are women? You know, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So, I just want to say that doesn't mean that we have women friends just so that we're not red flags. Just saying, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, it's a funny thing.
Society has changed, and the relationships between men and women have expanded beyond the need for the sexual desire or the sexual desire. You know, there's the actual I guess emotional contact between.
Yeah. Well, I think and
also I want to say, sorry to interrupt you, but I just thought now about, because we're talking about female and male being friends, but you were talking about before about sexuality, and I don't really thought about, you know, a gay guy and either a gay guy or a gay guy being friends, or a gay guy and a straight guy being friends.
That was exactly my next comment. Yeah.
I wouldn't have any problems if my best friends were gay, but I think the only way that relationship would, or that friendship would work, is if I wasn't the gay guy's type.
You know? Okay, yeah.
And he didn't find me physically attractive because he likes small black dudes or whatever, you know?
Has it ever happened to you that I've
been
friends with a gay guy and he suddenly said,
no,
you know, I think we better stay apart because I'm liking you too much? Or
no, actually no.
I mean, put it this way: you're straight or you're gay?
I'm straight, yes.
Right. I mean, because this was. I'm glad you brought it up, because that was my next comment / question to you. One of the biggest changes that are happening now in your generation is your incredible freedom as far as sexual orientation and gender
identity.
Yeah, gender identity, etc. So you have pansexuals and you have your non-binaries, etc., which I find incredibly admirable, but also quite confusing when it comes to somebody maybe not your age so much, maybe a little bit younger, when you're navigating that age where you're starting to experiment that for the first time. And I'm wondering how that works when it comes to friendships, because of exactly the same thing. What exactly you just mentioned is, if you're an adolescent and you're starting to feel all these changes, and you live in a society where you're not restricted like I was to being heterosexual, it must be really hard to be able to navigate the world of friendships when you're, say if you're a young man feeling the need to experiment, or you don't really know if you're gay or if you're not gay, or you don't really know where your sexual orientation goes from, or even your gender identity. It must be really hard to say, okay, this guy's my friend and I like him only as a friend, or this girl's a friend and I only like her as a friend. I don't want any more. I don't know. What do you think? What's your take on that? Seeing as you're in that society now, you are that generation.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's it's kind of just the norm, so it's not hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
because
for
we grew up
for
with it.
you
Yeah.
guys, it's only difficult because you didn't grow up with it, so you don't understand it. Not a, but you know, like
No,
being
that's true.
growing
We
up
don't
like that.
understand. There's a lot of things when
So
somebody comes up to me and says, "Call me them," I go, "What?"
yeah,
Right? You know, and I respect it. I totally respect it. I just find it hard to understand because for me, it's not. I mean, it's not really a big deal, but I have to get my head around it. Whereas
right.
you grew up with it.
Ultimately, if there's no problem if there's that respect for the person, you know.
Right. And
If you're just friends with someone because they're not gay, then you don't truly respect the person for who they are.
right.
If that makes sense. So
Totally.
or non-binary or whatever. So ultimately, if you just respect the first person for who they are, then you shouldn't have a problem with them not having same sexual orientation as you, or having the same sexual orientation as you. You know.
Okay. So
It's-
you're telling me that if right now one of your friends, male friends,
Yeah.
suddenly came out and said, "I'm gay,"
Yeah.
would your relationship with him change?
No, I would have a lot of questions for them, but my relationship wouldn't change. I
Like-
wouldn't see them as less of a friend. I wouldn't see them as
And your
more of a friend. They would just stay the same.
and your questions would be born out of pure curiosity, not out of anything else,
Yeah.
prejudice or anything, just
No,
curiosity.
just
Okay.
you know, because
'Cause I
ultimately,
know-
I don't have any gay male friends that I know of. So
Well, but this day it's not a thing, right? I mean, if someone
What?
wanted coming out as a gay person, it's not.
no, it's not a thing.
I mean,
at all.
unless the parents were my age and they were really, really, really old school that they wouldn't understand. Nobody. I mean, these days, somebody comes out as gay, you're like, oh, whatever, you know, to
Yeah.
someone who cares.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it depends on the way that you're raised, but generally, I feel like the general consensus is most people will take it fine, you know.
Right.
Also, obviously, there's gonna be the people that are gonna take offense to it or aren't
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
like it or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. Of course, there always will.
You know, there's always gonna be racist and stuff like that, but you can't really do anything.
Okay. And without veering too much into that area, because that really is another podcast
Yeah.
and another venture. The what's very fashionable now is the manscapism thing.
Yeah.
Does that affect friendships at all?
Honestly, if one of my friends had a problem with me going to the gym, I'd be like, "What? What are you saying?"
Well,
right
I
now?"
mean, maybe
You know?
maybe somebody could have easily had a bad experience with somebody that's really manospheric, and they immediately associate that kind of culture with going to the gym.
Yeah,
So
I understand that, but ultimately, again, that mindset doesn't make sense at all. You know?
But you never know, man.
Yeah.
Women and men are very, very, very weird.
Yeah,
when it comes down to it.
but you know, that's kind of like saying you had one bad experience with a black person, so now every time you see a black person, you're like, "Are you going to do something bad?" It's like, dude, what?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, one
one
of my biggest shocks was when I was given the position that I'm in at school.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of people, and a couple of them relatively close to me, right? Veering on the friendship thing because we've been working for so long, they literally stopped talking to me.
Right.
I never understood why. I really thought I had done something to that. I never related my being promoted with them stopping talking to me because it was ridiculous. However, that was the reason why they stopped talking to me, because I got promoted and they didn't. And even to this day, I find it absolutely ridiculous. Right. So it could be that somebody goes up to you and says, "Oh, now you're going to the gym. You're one of them." Well, I'm not talking to you now.
Right, but it's two different scenarios because they got angry at you or they stopped talking to you because ultimately they're jealous of you getting the promotion and I'm not.
I know, but it's a circumstantial thing, just like you going to the gym.
Right, but that's the I guess the breakdown of the friendship or the relationship was due to jealousy. Whereas, you know, if someone got angry at me for going to the gym, it would be due to the fact that they have, I guess, a prejudice, I guess, to people
a
going to the
preconception of what
preconception
kind of
to
world
people
means,
people going to the gym. So there's two different reasons for the
To recap and to ask the question, do you think men and women can be friends, or will that relationship / sexuality / hormonal thing?
I think
always
men and
get in the way?
women can be friends. I think men and women, when it starts to become best friends, I think that's when the lines get blurred and when things can get complicated.
Perfect. In my case, my recap is that the sexuality, that the hormones are always going to get in the way. I'm not really sure it has to do with the deepness of the relationship.
And you're talking about my age, at my age.
At your age. At my age, there's no problem.
Right.
At my age, your priorities are totally different. Your hormones are already set in their place and are starting to dwindle away.
Yeah.
And there's no issue having a perfectly normal relationship with a person of the opposite sex or of your preferred sexual orientation, and not feel like you have to take it any further. At my age, no problem.
Sounds good. Well, it was a good episode. I hope I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, and leave your comments if you did. And see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.